Hello explorers and welcome to this tutorial. I'm Aline, Skeinwalker, the knitwear designer behind Skeinwalker Knits. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to wet block lace or texture. We will need a few items. So here I have my materials laid out on the table. I have some water in a container. I have a towel, a small one. Everything is going to be small today. I have some T-pins, a few blocking wires, and of course some projects to block. So those are mini projects. And underneath everything I have a foam block, which I always use to block my projects. It's looking like this. I can't show you the whole thing because it doesn't fit, but it's a square with some dents and it's pretty thick. Let me see, like so. I would say 1.5 centimeter. I don't know how much that would be in inches. It's as thick as my finger. And those are playgrounds blocks. Basically stuff you can buy for your kids or for babies. And they're nice also to block projects on. They are sort of waterproof. You can see the marks that the T-pins are leaving, but I'm fine with that. Those blocks are coming in many different colors. I selected white to be sure that no dye would, stay on my projects. And they are made actually for babies, so if it's good for babies, then it's good for my knitting too. So let's start. I have 2 small projects that I'm going to wet block. I have a mini cowl that could actually be a mitt, possibly, or a wrist warmer. And I'm also going to use a mini scarf or stole. That could be a stole with lace. Both are using lace. So let's start. While I'm going to talk, I'm going to put this mini scarf in the water. I have a bowl of warm water, which I'm using for demonstration. Of course, if you're blocking a big project, you will need a bigger water container. So I'm going to immerse my mini scarf. Let it soak the water. I'm doing the same for the cowl, so you can see this is the before. And the cowl is thicker, so I will need to leave it longer in the water. So I'm going to dry my hands for now. You can see bubbles are coming out of the cowl. So basically, when I do that, I will use a large tub because this is the easiest for me. I can move it. I can put it in the bathroom in the sink and then fill it with water and with wool wash. And then I can either leave it there or move it out of the way, and I leave my project in the container. So typically I would leave my project at least half an hour in the water, and I'm going to let it soak, but do not agitate the project too much. Yarn and wool can be in warm water. Basically, the process for dyeing yarn is bringing the yarn to a pretty high temperature, so the yarn can withstand in general like higher temperature. Right now, it's it's fine for my skin to touch the water, so it's going to be fine for my yarn too. But especially if your yarn is non-superwash, so untreated wool yarn, like this one, for example. This is a 2-ply untreated wool yarn. You should not agitate your project while it's in the water, because this is the agitation and the friction that will make the scales of the wool stick together, which is a process known as felting. And once it's felted, it's finished. There's nothing you can do about it apart from felting it further and doing something else with your project. But warm water is fine, but just don't agitate too much. I'm not so worried about my yarn that's now in the water, because this is superwash. This is merino, but it's superwash, so most probably nothing is going to happen to it. So after at least 1 hour, no, usually at least half an hour in the water. It can be longer, of course, but don't leave it for days. After at least half an hour in the water, then I will take out the project and start the blocking process. So this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to move the wires out of the way and use my small towel to dry my project a little bit. So I'm going to start with the scarf. Let me show you. This is very interesting. The scarf has now become very drapey. So if you have a big project, I'm not so worried about this one, but if you have a big project that is heavy, don't pick it up like this, letting it hang on itself, or that might distort your stitches. This one is super light. So what I'm going to do is remove a bit of the water. Of course, if your project is bigger, and most likely it's going to be, it's not going to fit in your hand. But you can, squeeze it a little bit per portions and then place it on the towel. So that's what I'm going to do. I put the cowl away for now, and I'm going to roll. First, put my project flat on the towel and then roll it to dry it a little bit. So typically I would fold the towel like this, and then I'm going to roll it. And if I have a big project, I'll do the same. I'll squeeze the project in the towel to remove the excess water. And of course, if your project is bigger and your towel is bigger, then you'll make that same process in sections. So now my mini scarf is still damp and wet, but not dripping water anymore. So I can put the towel aside. I'm going to need it for the cowl again. So for this specific project, I'm going to use blocking wires and T-pins. So I have a lot of T-pins. Sometimes you need a lot of T-pins. And I'm first going to show you what I usually do with scarves. When I design a scarf, I especially like to have a line of yarn overs at the edge, plus an edging with, for example here, a garter stitch with 2 stitches. When I'm using blocking wires with such a scarf, I'm going to weave in and out using the yarn overs. So I start in one of the corners and I go under, above, under, above, under, above with my blocking wire, like so. And I go all the way using all the yarn overs to weave in and out. And I'm at the end, so okay. So I'm going to do the same for the other sides. And in that way, the edges of my scarf, the long edges, will be the straightest possible. So when you are wet blocking a project, remember that the knitted fabric is malleable and that the blocking itself is also a creative process. So you can create shapes in your knitting. So sometimes the stitches lend themselves to creating peaks or scallops. So you're not forced to use always, straight lines. Okay, here I'm at the end also. You can create shapes in your knitting. So let's do this the other way around, like so. Let's see if everything is in the image. So this scarf, this is a swatch of the Xeno scarf. This scarf is worked in the bias. So the lace is going straight in this direction and the scarf itself is going in a diagonal. For today, I'm going to pin it straight like this, because usually I will put block after block after block using those dents to make the blocking support larger. So I don't go in a diagonal, I just go in a straight line. By the way, when you put blocking wires, and now I'm using, of course, a small project and small blocking wires, but if you are blocking a real project, at some point you will have to switch between blocking wire, because your blocking wire is that long and not as long as your scarf, more probably, or stole. So let me show you how I do that. So typically when I switch blocking wire in the middle of a project, I will overlap for a few stitches. So let's say my blocking wire is finished here. I will overlap using those 2 stitches and then I will continue under, above the strand, under the strand, above the strand, and so on. And when I'm blocking, I keep enough overlap between the two blocking wires. So see here, I have more than 1 hand of overlap. And I do that because I'm going to stretch the project when I block it. So I want to have enough room to be able to do that, and so that the edge stitches are still staying on my blocking wire. But for ease of demonstration today, I'm going just to use those 2 wires because the project fits on them. So typically when blocking, I will blocking a scarf like this, or a stole, something that is straight, and on blocking wires I'm going to place T-pins on one side. So I anchor the blocking wire, and then I'm going to stretch. And of course, blocking wires are flexible, so that means that I will need to add more T-pins to maintain the straightness, if it's a word, of my blocking wire. I can put 1 pin here to help with this, but I don't want to put too much because I'm going to stretch the project lengthwise also, not only in width. So let's see, I'm going to go up to here. I could put 1 pin in the middle, so I put the pins diagonally when I pin them in the support, so that they can withstand a bit of force, because the force is going to pull everything in this direction. So I want to go against that. So I'll put 1 here and 1 here, and I can start the creative blocking. So first, you have to decide for yourself how much you want to stretch the fabric itself. I'm going to place 1 pin here, and I'm going to maintain, of course, the diagonal, and place 1 pin on the other side here. If it's a long scarf, I will pat the project so that all the portions of the scarves are stretched equally. So here I need to have this here under, and I'm going probably to stretch until here, up to here. It's too much, and this one needs to be also in a diagonal, so I'm going to stretch it in this way and place a pin here. So this is the initial shaping of the project. If I don't like it, I can always remove the pins. Here my wire is not straight, so I'm going to backtrack a bit, straighten the wire, and replace the pins. So blocking is a creative process, and in the middle of blocking, I will make decisions to see if I want to create peaks or scallops, or how I want to stretch the project, how much, how little. That depends if the project is a lace project or a texture project. I can decide to block in a straight line. Like so. This is, by the way, just a swatch, so this is not the real pattern. The real pattern does have stockinette, but this is a demonstration for if you want to make a diagonal. And if you want to make some peaks, you have to decide where the peaks are going to be formed, and then place a pin in that, at that specific spot in a stitch that you select. So if I say I want to make a peak here, I will just place a pin, not in the edging, because here I have 2 rows of garter for my edging. I will go above that and take the first stitch of the lace pattern, and in that way I don't stretch the edging too much, not on its own, but I do stretch the lace. So if I look at where I want to place another, I can use this column of stitches and I can pin and stretch like so. So with lace, it's very easy to create peaks. I'm going to make another one here. To create a peak, you just, select your stitch and stretch. Here I can go a bit further. Here I have another column which I'm going to use. This one needs to be moved a little bit, like so. And here, if I want, I can make another one. And for the very edge of the scarf, I can also decide to pull much more than I did at the beginning and create a small peak in that corner. Same thing here. Select your stitch and pull. So I can continue like that. Here I don't have a lot of tension on the edges, but if I'm blocking a scarf or a stole, I will typically add a lot more pins to maintain the straight edges and make sure that my blocking wires are not forming curves along the long edges. So this is an example of creative process of how you will block a lace scarf like this. Just an example. Remember, blocking is a creative process, so you can decide what you want to do with your project at the blocking phase. If you're using one of my patterns, Skeinwalker pattern, then I usually have a section that explains how I finished the project, so how I blocked it, and I also include blocking pictures to show you what I did exactly to get the result that is shown on the pictures of the sample. So make sure to check the blocking photographs, and then you can see exactly what I did with the peaks and the scallops and so on and so on. In specific patterns, I will also tell where to place the pin. For example, here I could explain that you pick the center stitch that is aligned with the columns of stitch number, whatever, if it's shown on the charts. It's always shown on the charts because I'm always using charts, but then in specific cases I can refer to the stitch number to help you with seeing or deciding seeing how I block the project and deciding for yourself how you want to block your project. So typically this is a blocking process for a scarf. I will leave this in place until it's really, really dry. You could be in a hurry, and I understand that, and sometimes I'm also in a hurry to get my project, but you shouldn't unpin your project before it's totally dry, because otherwise it's going to lose its shape. Once it's dry, you can take it out and gift or wear the project, whatever you want to do. Okay, so this was the process for scarf. I'm going to unpin this to make room for the next demonstration, which is a cowl. You can block and reblock your project. So if you didn't like what you did, for example, say I don't like the peaks I created, I can start all over again. As long as your project is wet, you're not committed to anything, the fabric and especially wool will still be malleable as long as it's wet, so you can spray it with a plant, a water spray for plants, for example, or you can put it back into the water. Once it's dry, it will tend to remember its shape, but you can still reblock it if you really don't like what you did and try once more. So let's remove this. Of course, the project is not dry in this case, but I'm going to put this aside, and we are going to work with the cowl, which is still in the water. Let me see in the meantime if I want to share something else with you, because I took some notes. There is a lot to talk about when blocking or about blocking projects. Oh yeah, so about reblocking. So once you have made your the initial block of your project and the project has dry and you have you could wear your project a couple of times and so on, and you would like to wash it. After washing it, you will need to partially reblock it. So depending on what's the yarn content, so if it's wool or if it contains something else, you will need to reblock more or less. But in general, especially if your yarn has wool content, the subsequent blocks will need less work. So it could be that you just have to stretch your project on a flat surface and let it dry, and it will be okay. It could be that you need to put few pins because you want to recreate the peaks, but then you have to decide for yourself how much time you would want to spend on it and how much reblocking your project and your yarn especially needs. So let's do the same for a cowl. So now I have my small cowl, or maybe mitt, I don't know, which is still in the water. So I'm going to get it out of the water and remove some excess water and start the process all over again with the towel. I can put this to the side. We probably won't need it anymore. And same as before, I will fold everything in a towel and then roll it. Remove as much water as I can. Unfold everything and then get to my project. So for a cowl, typically I will also use some blocking wires, a bit differently than for a scarf or a stole. So I will insert, of course this is super small, but the same is true for a larger cowl or a larger mitt if you're making some mitts. So I will put the two blocking wires inside of the tube, because the cowl is also a tube, and then I will stretch the cowl. Let me see how I do that with my microphone standard in the way. I will stretch the cowl like this. So my cowl is, of course, I have a double layer that you can't do anything else with the cowl. I'm going to decide what stitch pattern I want to have on top. I want to have this one, and in this specific case the pattern, let me turn that again, the pattern is using 2 repeats of my stitch pattern. So I have this leaf shape on this side, and if I flip the cowl I have exactly the same on the other side. Here this is still the same leaf shape, but it's offset by half a repeat. So I'm going to block like this. This is the Etraz cowl, by the way. So it was inspired by a forest. So that's a swatch, of course. This is not the cowl, but that's the patterns. Those are the patterns that I used for the Etraz cowl. So in this case, I'm using an even number of pattern repeats, so I can pin both layers at the same time. So if you look at this stitch here, I'm going to pin this as a peak, and at the same time I'm going to pin the second layer here as a peak. But first I start by pinning the wires. So let me get this in cowl formation. And when I do that for a cowl, typically I will start by pinning one wire, like so. That's the fly. And I see that the light is really changing today, so I'm going to see if I can adjust the brightness. I can, but it doesn't look good, so bear with me for a moment. I'm going to see if I can change that in my settings right now. Exposure. Yes, okay. Hopefully the light will remain stable. Sorry about this interruption. Technicalities. Sometimes they don't play well. Well, the light has been really changing last weeks, I guess. It's supposed to be spring, but the weather is very unstable. So I can go on and pin my cowl. Well, actually not the cowl itself, but the blocking wires. So typically I'm going to stretch the blocking wires so that the circumference of the cowl is becoming larger. Of course, now I can use one end and go over, reach both sides. If you are blocking a real cowl, you won't be able to do that. But then you anchor one wire like so. It could be temporary. And then I will typically stretch on the other side. So I can put a pin in the middle. It can also be a temporary pin, because when blocking, a lot is about pinning and repinning and making sure things are aligned and everything. So I don't want to put too many pins on the sides yet of my cowl, because I want to stretch also in height and not only in width or circumference. So typically it's a process where you start in one direction and then you go and pin in the other direction, and then you readjust in the first direction. So it could be in width, then in height, then again in width. It can be trial and error, but it's a lot of pinning and repinning. So with this pattern, I can make sure that both layers are aligned. And in general, you can see this on the pattern photographs that I include in my patterns. And if there is something special about the blocking, for example, if you cannot block both layers at the same time because I used asymmetric stitch patterns or white stitch patterns that don't totally repeat and do not align across both layers of the fabric, then I will specify that in the finishing section. So now I'm going to select which stitch I'm going to use for the layer that is under, making sure I'm aligning everything. So here this stitch was really made to create a peak, so I see that I'm not in the correct stitch. So if it looks cute, if it's not as straight as you would like, then you can adjust this. I lost the second layer. And now I can pin and stretch. Now what you see happening on the side is that typically my wire will lift from the surface I'm pinning in on. that's okay, you can use more pins soon. So here for the edge, the bottom edge, I'm going to place another pin here on the side, stretch equally so that I'm aligning everything. Make sure that both layers also are aligned, and then pin that specific stitch to where I want it to be. It's a creative process. So the choices that I make when I block a project are very subjective. So if I don't like it, or if you don't like it, then you are free to, try something else and experiment with that also. So here I'm going to pin this peak here too. This one is not far enough, so I'm going to repin so that everything is going to be aligned, well, as much as I can or want. And this is also, this is not exact science. This is a creative process, like I said. So there is no real definition of what is good blocking, what is not a good blocking. You can choose what you want to do. So here at the top, I'm also going to create a peak. So I'm going to use that middle stitch here that is coming straight out of the leaf and place the pin in there. And then I'm going to have a look at where that stitch is in the second layer, or under here. And I'm going to place my pin also in that column, which is actually easier to see than on the right side, because the right side is a purl stitch and here I have a knit stitch column. So I'm going to use this stitch here and then decide how far I want to go with that peak. If I need to repin, I'm going to make sure that I lift both layers of the fabric, because I don't want to lose one layer. I don't want to lose the stitch that I selected to create the peak. And same thing for those two on the side. See, I'm moving the pins of the wires to get them out of the way, and here I'm going to create a peak, lifting the fabric a little bit, creating my peak. I could go further with this one in the middle. I'm going to create the peak also here on this edge, making sure that my fabric is aligned properly, both layers. I go up to here. I'm going to repin this one, lifting the fabric. So I go under both layers of the fabric with my finger, and I make sure that I lift everything when I repin this peak. Like so. Now what I still have to do is make sure that the wires for the short edges, well, typically for a cowl, those would be the short edges, are straight. So because there is a lot of tension, this pin has moved and my cable is lifted from the support. So I'm going to pin the cable with sorry, not the cable, but the blocking wire with a lot of pins on this side. I maintain it and I give tension to make it straight. And I use as many pins as necessary to create a straight line with my wire. So same thing for the other side. I'm going to pull on the wire to straighten the fabric and the wire, and place all the pins I need. Everything is moving, okay, to make the thing straight as I can. And when I'm done with this, I can see, this peak is a bit twisted to the right, so I will lift the fabric again, both layers, and I'm going to repin this once more, like so. Once you're done, you can pat the fabric, making the straight line a bit straighter if it's necessary. And you can also make sure that both layers, because you cannot be under and above with your fingers, especially if everything is pinned. So you can make sure that both layers of the fabric are aligned. If they are not aligned properly, you can, unpin the thing for a moment, try to align. Here, in this case, the yarn over holes, and replace the pins as you need, like so. So this is the process for a cowl. Once more, you leave this until it's completely dry, and then you're done, almost done with the blocking. So the thing with the cowl is that, of course, we are blocking 2 layers at the same time, which means that we have to fold the fabric, typically here where the blocking wire is placed. By the way, if you don't have blocking wires, you can just use a lot of pins. And this is true for a cowl, but this is true for another project, like the scarf that we did, or anything else. So if you don't have blocking wires, don't worry. If you do have blocking wires, you can use them like this. If you don't have blocking wires and you have pool noodles, you could also block the cowl using pool noodles inside the cowl, inside the tube, like I did for the blocking wires. The advantage of the pool noodles is that you will have a round and smooth edge here, instead of something that is a bit that is flat and that will mostly create a crease. The disadvantages is that it's a bit more difficult to pin peaks and scallops, for example, like this, especially at the edges. But you can be creative, and you can use also other sorts of blocking devices, so not only wires. If this is all too much for you and you don't want to use pins, you don't want to use blocking wires, this is totally okay. Then I would still recommend to wash your project in warm water and put some wool wash in there. That wool wash, ideally, that you don't need to rinse, because this is easier and you don't need to manipulate the fabric too much. Then just place it on a flat surface, pat it, create whatever shape you want to have, and then you're done. You can leave it to dry. Okay, I'm going to unpin this. So with the cowl, once it's fully dry, it could be that you have creases on the sides where the blocking wires were placed. And typically to remove the creases, I will use steam. So I basically use an iron that has a steam production setting, and I block only the creases so that they disappear. So of course my project is not dry, so I can still try to show you. So basically I'm going to lose my block right now, but then you can still see some creases. So it will be even more pronounced when the fabric is dry. Basically what I will do is I will use a damp cotton cloth that I put on top of my project, and I will hover with my iron in the steam mode, and I will steam the project without touching the fabric. So you hover over the fabric, you don't touch it. And the damp cotton cloth is used for two things. It's protecting my fabric, and it's also giving more moisture. So I will do that for one crease, then I will turn the project, flip it, go to the other side, steam the other crease, and if I'm not still happy with that, I will repeat the process until I'm happy. Usually I do it twice per crease. And if I see that at the crease my project is losing its peak or its scallop, I will put just one pin here, maybe one pin at the bottom, not to stretch really the project in an extreme way, but just to, give it its shape and making sure that it's like the rest of the project. So basically that's what I do for cowls. So this one is still wet, so it's actually not blocked. And I could start all over again and put it in the water once more if I want. So let's have a look at a few examples, and I would like also to show you the before and after of blocking. I will check my notes once more to see if I forgot anything that I wanted to say up to now. So far so good. I'm going to show you an example of a before and after. So I have a cowl, a swatch with cables and lace, and a swatch with cable and lace. So this is my swatch. You can't see it yet, but I'm fighting with the yarn. So this is the before. So typically you see that it's all a mess. It doesn't look like lace. It doesn't look like nice cables yet. My edging is even rolling, which it's funny because it's, it's a rib, but still rolling at the transition. I think I didn't restore it in a very neat way, but still you can see that it's not a wearable project yet, even though it's a swatch, of course. I'm going to show you the finished project with exactly the same yarn, except that it's all blocked, all dry, and it's going to be visible that it lies a lot flatter. I'm moving the water away from me for a moment. Let me take the project. So this is the after. Exactly the same yarn. Fonty Mongolia 5, I think. There's a lot of wool in there, so the yarn really relaxes in water and it lies a lot flatter than the swatch. If you compare, you can see that also the wrong side is way flatter for the real project, and the lace is all opened nicely. So blocking does really matter, and you can also see that the project, especially here in the cable section, the project has relaxed and it grew actually in the blocking process. So if I try to align the swatch and the project, you can see that here I'm taking this column. You can see that the finished lace is wider, and also that the cables are a lot wider because they come up to here. I did 2 cables and not 3, but you can see that, blocking the project, even using, the same needles and the same knitter, the before and after is quite dramatic. This is why it's recommended to block your projects. I like wet blocking because, I can let water do the work. I can take my time to pin anything that I want to pin, and the result is nice. So this is the before and after. This is also an example where you have a texture on the cowl, especially here with the cables. So the way you block should be dependent on what stitches you used in your project. So here I have a lot of texture stitches, and I don't want to block so aggressively that my cables are going to be all stretched out and flat. I want to keep that 3D effect of the cables, even though they will stretch because I'm going to still block the project and I want to open the lace. But then blocking should be dependent on what you used in your project, what stitches, what kind of pattern, texture or no texture, and so on and so on. I could have decided just to not stretch this at all and just let it lie flat. Actually, maybe this is what I did. I don't really recall exactly what I did for this pattern, but yeah, this is Frohan. So if you like it, you can check in the pattern, and in the pattern I gave the instructions, so you can block it the same way. So here I used straight lines, and just I made sure that the lace is open. So that was an example with texture. So let me get rid of it. Another example with texture is I'm going now to show you some already block designs. So this is Julie O. This is a cowl pattern. It's knit flat and then joined in the round. The light has changed again, so I'm going to change the exposure of my video again. Sorry about that. Okay, looks better. It's a bit more the real colors of the cowl. So a gold, yellow, and a turquoise blue, sorry. This cowl also has texture, so same thing, I don't want to block too much when I'm blocking the lace and cables right here, or the slip stitches right here. Because if you do that, you're going to distort the fabric completely, and you're going to lose the effect of the texture of the stitches. Okay. Also, make sure that you take the yarn that you're using into consideration. It could be that you are using a wool yarn, but it could be that you are using something else. So here I have a cotton yarn. This is very, very sturdy yarn. If you try to break it with your own hands, you're going to have a tough time. Same thing in general for silk. For wool yarns and maybe some blends, you might have to be a bit more cautious about how aggressively you block the project. So make sure to check how sturdy your yarn is. What you can do, I'll put this one aside, what you can do is make a break test. So here I have wool only non-superwash yarn. It's a 2-ply, it's loosely plied, and it's very fragile. So if I try to break it with my own hands, it's super easy. Which means that when you block this, you should be really careful when you apply tension to the yarn. It happened to me once, so don't do the same mistake. I was stretching a lace shawl and stretching and stretching and stretching, and the yarn broke at the garter tab. So first, then I was blocking the shawl, so I had to stop everything. The project was about to be finished, but I have to stop everything and then fix the lace. And especially at the garter tab, this is really the basis of your shawl when you start it, and everything could unravel from there. So it's something that you don't want to have happen to you. So be careful, especially with yarns that are more breakable, more fragile. Don't pull too much. If you do the break test and there's no way, it's almost a steel cable, there's no way you can break the yarn, you can probably pull a bit more on your fabric. So cotton is stronger than wool in general. Silk is very strong. Also in general would depend on, if it's a blend, would depend on the how it's plied, and so on. But in general, it would be a lot more sturdy and less breakable than a wool. So this is a cotton. Cotton will have the property of keeping the block a lot less than wool, but you can still block it. So here in that case, I was creative with some pins, and with some peaks. That's what I wanted to say, and I created some sort of leaf shape. So I used several pins to create this. And same thing right here. So, like so. So you are free to create the shapes you want for your project. So it's not really well blocked at the moment, but it's to give you an idea of what you can do. This is a shawl. This is a curling shawl. And when you come to the tip, you will probably have to use more pins to make it assume the shape that you want it. It's been lying in a chest for some time, so the blocking is a bit wonky, but basically it's creating a curve like this. So this is the Duha shawl with cotton yarn. Another project where I used cotton yarn, and I used some small peaks again. It's this one. This is Heolia. This is actually the same cotton yarn as the Duha shawl. I like it because it creates nice gradients. So I have two different sort of peaks for this project. And of course here with the edging and the yarn overs, I used the blocking wires so to have all my long edges straight, which is why I like to use this specific edging for long projects like scarves and stoles or blankets, I guess. But so if your project doesn't have this kind of edging, you can always add a small yarn over and then a decrease. Typically I will use a Pearl 2 yarn over knit 2 together, and then when I come to the other ends I use a SK yarn over Pearl 2, and then on the wrong side I purl everything, and that creates a small garter border of 2 stitches and then a nice straight column of yarn overs that I can use to block the project. So this was Eolia. And Eolia I pinned by stretching the project really aggressively, and the yarn can withstand that kind of tension because this is cotton, and also I wanted to have the lace really well opened. This is the Humbelly cowl. It's a mix of lace and brioche lace. In this specific case, I used the tendency that the pattern had to create scallops. So this is also a project where I aligned both layers, so I have a symmetrical pattern on both layers. And then what I did is I pinned some scallops. So when you pin a peak, you can just use one peak and pull, and that's going to make one peak. When you are creating a scallop, you have to use more pins. So the same principle holds. I will make sure that both my layers are aligned, and I will pin them together. And the together is valid and holds only if the stitch pattern is symmetrical. So if I can align everything, then I can pin both layers at the same time. To create a scallop, I will use extra pins. So typically I use 3, maybe sometimes 5, so that I pin the top part, in this case the lowest part, and then I pin on either side of it, and I will pull the fabric outwards to the right and to the left, like so. Here now I see that my center pin is not aligned properly, so I will replace it in the proper spot, and I might have to release some tension to form, you know, an even scallop. So if I do something like this, I'm going to have a scallop that is lower on this side, the right side, than it is on the left side. So I can choose and go in 2 directions. I can release some tension on the right pin, or I can bring more tension on the left pin, like so. And if I do that, it's going to be more square than rounded, so I'm going to backtrack and release some tension, like so. And you do that for all your scallops, at the bottom and at the top if the cowl has a symmetrical edging between the bottom and the top. So like I said earlier, the blocking process is a creative process, and there is no right or wrong way to do it. You have to decide for yourself how much you want to pull the fabric, and how you want to block it, if you want scallops or peaks or whatever. So the backtracking that I do when I decide how I want the scallop to be blocked is because I don't want maybe a square form, but I also don't want to overstretch the project. So if I would do this, of course now the cowl is pinned only with 3 pins and not with a lot of pins, but it could be that my project is overstretched and I don't like the shape that the pins are creating. So I will decide if I want to release some tension and backtrack so that I have a rounded shape. I'm holding the cowl because of course there's only 3 pins, so it's not blocking, it's just a demo. But then I release the tension until I like the rounded shape that I get. And of course you do that with all your scallops. So with this project and maybe other projects like Frohau, the cowl with the cables, you have to make a compromise between opening the lace, like here. I have of course yarn overs, and not flattening out the brioche or the cables or anything too much. So if you pull too much in one direction, or if you pull too much in the other direction, you're going to distort your stitch pattern and the forms that it creates. So it's a trade-off between opening the lace properly and not overstretching anything that relies on texture. But it's possible. You can make a good trade-off and have a nice block for both of your patterns. What do we have next? I have an example with some slip stitch patterns. This is the Lismore cowl. It's using slip stitches and yarn overs. You can see my fingers through the fabric here. So in this case, it was also a trade-off between how much to open the lace and how much not to stretch the slip stitches too much, because I still wanted to have my columns of slip stitches visible. And the back side is fun too, and it's more, bumpy and lacy. So this is one more example of blocking some texture. I had to adjust the light again, sorry about this. Another example of texture is a brioche cowl. This is the oh, I forgot the name. Good question. I've published so many patterns that I'm blanking out on the name of this one, which is going in this direction actually. So this is a very, very fun brioche pattern with a beautiful Malabrigo Arroyo yarn. So it's brioche, so I blocked it so that it's not stretched too much, because I want to keep the texture of the brioche. And of course, I wanted to make some scallops on the edgings, so I did that. I'm going to adjust the light again, sorry about this. It's a long tutorial, and it's a day where the weather it's changing a lot. So this is, oh yes, Dune Iris. It was inspired by the music of Dune 1, and it's about shifting sand and so on. But for the blocking, I wanted to make sure that I didn't block the lace so that it became all flat, because not lace but brioche, of course. Well, it's brioche lace technically, but I want to keep the nice texture and the 3D effect and the squishy effect of the brioche, and not stretch everything too much. So another example of texture. What do we have? We have two more with some mix of lace and special cables. This is the Kisalis cowl. I have lace and cables that are creating some hourglass kind of shape. So here also I had a trade-off between opening the lace and making sure that the cables were not too flat. Those are cables that are a lot flatter than the cables that I used for the Frohang cowl, for example. And the yarn is also thinner, so the effect of the cable is different. Okay, so if you're blocking texture, cables, brioche, mosaic, slip stitch, you probably want to make sure to block gently. This is the Valfier cowl. It's part of my exhibition, no, not exhibition, but expedition year 3, the trails. This is a show club, and it's using some lace with negative space, so very large yarn over holes, and it's using cables and lace combined here. And this is another example of a trade-off. So I really wanted to make sure to open the large yarn overs very well, while at the same time keeping the 3D texture of my cables here that are going up the cowl. So it worked. You can do that. I blocked it in two different ways, at the bottom and at the top. So this is typically, let's see, no, this one was still blocked symmetrically. You can see that I was able to align all the peaks. But I created some peaks at the bottom edge, and I created some scallops at the top. So you have two kinds of border edging treatments on the same cowl. If I would have blocked those two layers separately, and this is also something that you will see in my patterns, if I block the two layers separately, typically I will place the pins, of course. So I have my blocking wires here on the side, then I place the pins at the bottom. So I roll the fabric like so. I place all my pins where I want them to be, and then when I'm going to the second layer, then I will pin the second layer wherever it needs to be to create the right shape, or the shape I want. So I will put that in the instructions, in the pattern, in the finishing instructions, and I will also usually put some process pictures. But if there are no process pictures, and then process pictures about blocking the two layers separately, typically you roll your cowl like this so that you have access to the bottom layer only. You pin everything on the bottom layer, at the top and at the bottom, and of course on the sides you have pins or blocking wires, and then you roll the fabric flat like so, and you pin the second layer where it needs to be pinned. Same thing for the top, and then you leave everything to dry for some time. So that's it about blocking. Well, that was my last example. Let me double check the notes that I took to see if I forgot anything. I covered a lot. This tutorial is really long. I hope that you gain a lot of information about blocking, and that the examples also helped you. I hope that you had your knitting with you so that you could knit while I talk. I should have said that at the beginning, maybe. I'm going to check my notes right now. Oh yeah, I wanted to add something about fiber content. Next to checking if your yarn is able to withstand tension, which is super important before you start pinning anything, some yarns will also hold the block better than others. So typically wool, non-superwash wool like this one, or superwash wool like this one, they will hold the block really well. The same is usually true with wool blends. Cotton usually tends to have the tendency to hold the block a lot less because it's not elastic. and it's usually losing its shape. So if you have maybe a cotton t-shirt and it's getting old and you see that it's getting the form of the t-shirt is getting altered or not as it was at the beginning, this is typically one property of cotton. Cotton will lose its shape. It could tend to grow in some direction, but it will not spring back like wool does. If I stretch this is wool, it's going to spring back in shape. Acrylic yarn is fine if you want to throw your project into the washing machine and not care about it. If you are making maybe projects for babies that need to be washed really very, very, very often. The thing with acrylic is that it's going to be very difficult to block. If you do, I have a project, it's called Kalasi. It's a lace project that is worked in acrylic yarn. You can totally do that. I would recommend to use a larger needle than the yarn would call for if it's for lace, so that when the yarn springs back, then the yarn overhauls are still kind of open. The wet block, well, it will wash your fabric, but it will not do very much when it comes to blocking. Actually, you can steam block an acrylic project, but be very, 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 very careful about it, because acrylic will melt. So you really don't want to touch the fabric, and you don't want to be, if you're using an iron, you don't want to be too close to the fabric. You don't want your steaming and hovering over your project to be too warm. Hot, I guess I should say. And in that case, I would still put a damp cotton cloth between the iron and the fabric. Don't touch the fabric. Never touch the fabric. Acrylic will melt. It's going to be awful for your project, and it's going to be awful for your iron too. So I would recommend taking a bit of a distance and placing something in between your iron steam source and your fabric. But then that will be a fact of life. I mean, it's going to be easy to throw in the wash machine, but on the other hand, the blocking will be less good, less permanent. The yarn will have a mind of its own. This doesn't happen with wool. This doesn't happen with silk. Cotton is a bit of an exception, in the sense that it will tend to lose its shape, but you can still block it and you can still use it for, texture or lace projects or whatever. If you are not sure about how your yarn will behave with blocking, first you can do the break test. Like, this yarn is fragile. Don't pull too much on your yarn if it's fragile. And you can also try to block a swatch. You just test it for yourself and you can see how the yarn behaves. Of course, blocking a swatch is going to be different from blocking a real project, because with a real project you have some, good dimension that you can stretch either way. If it's a cowl, if it's a scarf, or if it's a shawl. If it's a swatch, it's going to be way more difficult to judge how you want to, stretch the project. But at least you can test how the yarn is taking the block, or behaving with the block. I think that was all I wanted to say for today. It's been really a lot. I hope that this was useful, and of course, make sure to check in your pattern, especially if you're using a Skeinwalker pattern. Make sure to check the instruction for finishing the project and have a look at the pictures that I put in there to show how I blocked the project. Blocking is part of the creative process. Blocking is what will make or, kill your project. So take the time for blocking. It's not very difficult. If you don't want to do it extensively with pin and everything, just well block your project and then, pat it, make it flat, nicely stretch all over in all directions, and just leave it to dry, and that's it. This is also blocking. You don't have to use tons of pins and spend a lot of time on blocking. But that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching. I hope this was useful, and see you next time. Bye.